told Kull, I told Cindy,
Chicago fire and everything was wood.
I told Cindy to be at 7 o'clock, and she came from Hartsville. The heat stopped being already. Cindy came to us back past August, and she became my granddaughter, my adopted granddaughter. She did, would you believe, everything I asked her to do. Everything. After tonight, I'm not going to have the pleasure of seeing her every day. She has taken a job at Kull University. I think doing the same thing that we've been doing. Somewhat. So, we decided back at the Hartfield that her project needs to be recorded. So we're going to do that tonight. Agnes secretary, most of y'all knew Agnes. And also Ava Thomy. Everybody knows something about Ava Thomy. If you didn't come to the exhibit during Hartfield, you missed something. Kathy volunteered to man the station when Cindy wasn't there. But I'm going to miss this girl. I don't believe we can replace her. I'm not going to look for anybody. I know it's bad. Okay. I'm hoping she's going to get dissatisfied at Coca and go back. Cindy Bryce.
So like I said, this was a project that I worked on this past April, starting in, I think September is right around when I started doing this research. To start off, I do want to say thank you to Continuum and the Belmar Foundation to support us and continue to allow us to use this space. So what this is going to be is just a little bit of history on two Lake City artists and their lives prior to being in Lake City.
Can you hear her?
Okay. Okay, so Agnes Kull was her original name. Her maiden name was Agnes Kull before she married.
Speak up.
Okay. So she was born in Narva, Estonia on March 19, 1919. She kind of grew up right between the two world wars and participated in World War II herself. So there's not a lot of information on Agnes's early years. If it ever existed, or if it does exist, it's not in the language that I can read, or it has just been misplaced and lost to the raptures of time. So instead, I'm going to give you a little bit of history on Estonia and how they got embroiled in World War II. So from about 1721 to 1918, Estonia was under the rule of the Russian Empire. While still being under Russian authority, Estonia began to experience a surge of nationalism, which fought to celebrate the Estonian, not Russian, way of life. Let's see here. Russia's hold on the country quickly became unstable in 1905 as they were faced with liberal revolutions. I don't know if the liberal revolutions happened in Estonia or if they were happening in Russia. That was not clear in any of my research. So after this revolution was suppressed, Russia began to regain its grip on Estonia. In 1917, another revolution broke out, and then in March of 1917, the reigning czar was forced to abdicate, which gave Estonia a chance to call for independence. This independence lasted for a little while. They gained some autonomy, but then the Communist Party took over and whatever they gained, they lost again. So that by the end of 1917, the Russian army was collapsing, and Germany came in and seized that power void fairly quickly. They gained power of Estonia from February 1918 to the end of World War I, until they were pushed out in 1919, and then Russia came back in and they were pushed out as well. The Treaty of Tartu was what finally gave Estonia its independence in February of 1920. So they had independence for a couple decades, then World War II started ramping up, and their location kind of primed them to get involved. There was no way they were going to avoid it. Just also with the history of Russia and Estonia, they were going to get caught up in it. So they made attempts to distance themselves from the upcoming conflicts by declaring neutrality in 1939. This was disregarded when Estonia was forced to sign the Basis Treaty, which was a Soviet-Estonian Mutual Assistance Treaty. It forced Estonia to give Russia the allowance to build military bases there. This picture right here is actually in 1939 showing the Red Army coming into Estonia after the Basis Treaty was signed. So, Hitler's goals. Why does he go after Estonia? Why does he go after the Slavic nations? How does Agnes get involved into this? So one of his goals was to bring the entire Germanic people, who were held as a racial group, they existed for a very, very long time, into the borders of one nation. So to do this, Hitler needed to expand their borders, a vast land, have a cheap, free labor source, right? That's where he looked to the Slavic nations to fill that void. So Belarus, Ukraine, Estonia, essentially, but all those, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, all those nations were primed for his taking. So they felt justified in this because as they saw themselves as a racial group, they saw everybody as some kind of racial inferiority to them, as you know. So these people were seen as genetically predisposed to being servants, to being manual labor. So they didn't see it as wrong as taking what was not theirs. So Germany invades Soviet Union in 1941, breaking that pact of 1939, this Nazi-Soviet pact, which results in Germany gaining control of Estonia. So this is really where Agnes gets involved. The German labor movement was originally a volunteer-based movement. It promised these nations, it started off in Poland, right? It promised these nations more food rations, better housing, monetary rewards. And the other thing was, it was only for 6 months. You could go home after 6 months, right? Initially, this was true. For the first, say, 6 months of the war effort that this program was going on, these people were writing back home, hey, yeah, this is true, come sign up. And so all these people were going and they were signing up in droves to join this labor movement. But eventually, I don't know if just supplies ran out or if it was never going to be an actual thing or what. But people started writing home and saying it's not as good as they say it is. And those numbers quickly dwindled. And this made it into a forced labor movement where you had to sign up. If you were between the ages of 16 to 60, you had to register for the German Labor Front. And in 1942, that's when it became compulsory for eligible inhabitants, which was anybody who was under German-occupied territories. So in 1942, Agnes is a senior at college, at the College of Tartu, when she is forced to join with her brother and sister at the German Labor Front. Let's see.
Which one is Agnes?
So Agnes is the one on the right, yeah. And her sister Armilda is right beside her. This is them in their uniforms. They were working on the railroads. I don't really know. Based on the uniforms, I don't think they were doing manual labor, but could have been, who knows. Their brother Victor, we don't know where he ended up at all. So from 1942 to 1945, we don't know what happened to her. We don't know what she was doing. As far as we know, she was working on the railroad. It wasn't until she meets with the Allied forces after the Battle of Dresden that we start picking up pieces of who she was and where she was. So let's see. This is actually a photo of the bombing of Dresden. So somehow she survived this. I don't know how. I guess she's just very lucky. Yeah. So that was in 1945, the bombing of Dresden. So after contacting the American forces in Dresden, Agnes found herself hundreds of miles from home. This was a reoccurring issue for millions of other forced labor workers sprawled out across German-occupied Europe. With no place to go, these individuals ended up in displaced persons camps. These camps were first set up by the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration in 1943. These camps were formed as temporary housing facilities, and millions of displaced people until they could find or return to their home countries. Most of these camps were concentration camps, just repurposed and rebranded, but in all actuality, it was just concentration camps. And this is an example of, I think, one in Soviet Union, yeah. So this tells a little excerpt of what the conditions in these camps were like and what Agnes probably experienced during her time in one. So it's a quote from Earl Harrison. I'm probably saying his name completely wrong. He was the appointed American delegate to the Intergovernmental Committee on Refugees. So generally speaking, many Jewish displaced persons and other possibly non-repatriable are living under guard behind barbed wire fences in camps of several descriptions, built by the Germans for slave laborers and Jews, including some of the most notorious of the concentration camps amidst crowded, frequently unsanitary, and generally grim conditions in complete idleness, with no opportunity except surreptitiously to communicate with the outside world, waiting, hoping for some word of encouragement and action in their behalf. There is a marked and serious lack of needed medical supplies. Many of the Jewish displaced persons, late July, had no clothing other than, to their chagrin, were obliged to wear German SS uniforms. And this is a photo. The guy on the right is Earl Harrison. So why did they go home? Yes.
Was Agnes, was she Jewish?
Yes and no, we're not sure. So her mother's last name, I forget what it is, but we do believe that she was of German heritage. But on all of her documentations, she was put as Lutheran. So yes, but records say no. Yeah. That was a question I had initially first, was why did she get chosen but her parents didn't go? And that was because of that 16 to 60 age limit. Her parents, I don't think, were that old, but they had a younger daughter who was 10 years old at the time. So there haven't been some kind of clause or exception that if you had a child below the age, you were exempt from joining the force. But yeah, that was the question I had as well. So why did they go home? After the end of the war, the Iron Curtain, advanced, and all these nations that were originally under German-occupied territory was now Russian, in a sense, or Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did not take kindly to the people who were tragically taken from their home, whether by force or willingly. So the Soviet Union did not see displaced people as victims of war, which they were. Rather, they saw them as traitors and deserters. Those who were forced to work as laborers or placed in concentration camps were often killed once they crossed into Soviet-controlled territory. This means Agnes, Armilda, and Victor would never be able to return home. And Agnes never saw her parents again. Both passed away before the fall of the Iron Curtain. She was able to meet her younger sister, who was 10 the last time she saw her, 35 years later, here in the city, actually, or Coward. There's newspaper articles of her coming to visit And I just wanted to show Estonia, where Estonia is all the way up there. I don't know if my mouse will show up. Yeah. So she was somewhere in this area, like Tartu, is somewhere over there. Marburg, which is where we think her displaced camp was, somewhere around Marburg. Oops. Sorry. Was somewhere in this area. So that distance, it would have taken 1 day and 11 hours by train if train was working, or routing, whatever. 21 hours and 39 minutes by car if she had the choice, which is about 1,200 miles, or 329 hours, 13 and a half days, 1,000 miles if she were to walk from Marburg, Germany to Tartu. So just the distance alone would have been a deterrent for her to go home. Or it would have been very difficult at the very least. So after the bombing of Dresden, or following the bombing of Dresden, Agnes is documented as being in a displaced persons camp in 1946. This is actually a displaced registration record. This is hers. And it says, like, when she left Estonia in April, what she did, and when she met the American forces. So, like I said earlier, we don't know which camp she was at. We think Arsenal, but there's no guarantee that that's correct. At one of these camps, she does meet Captain Joe Singletary, which is a soldier from Kull, South Carolina. Joe was involved in some of the most brutal battles of the European theater, such as the Battle of,
Hurricane Forest.
Yeah, and go ahead.
The Battle of Aachen.
There you go. Okay. After the fighting was over, Joe was given another task and was allowed to hire a secretary to help him. This is where we believe the two of them met and really got to know each other. And so we think that she was his secretary. We don't know, but we think that is what he was. She was likely chosen because she knew at least 5 languages at this time. We know it was German, Estonian, and English, which would have been pertinent from where she was. So according to records, Joe was in Marburg, Germany from 1945 to 1946. We believe he was or worked under a monument man. So monument men were individuals that worked to protect artwork, historical buildings, archives, and other culturally significant sites from further damage after the war. We believe that Joe was involved with these individuals due to documentation that placed him at the, I'm not going to attempt to say that, museum in Marburg. This site saw thousands of stolen artworks and documentation going through his door. And this is actually from Pole 3, which is an archive site that has military documents. And this is his name, his signature. And it says, today 16 truckloads of artwork and archives will be stored. The works will be done by 30 city prisoners. So, yeah, we know he was there. We think he was one. Again, no confirmation though. So coming to the United States, they fell in love during their time together in Europe. In 1947, Joe left Europe, returned home. A few months later, he paid for Agnes's travel expenses, and the two were shortly married after May 25th, 1947, at the Ariel Baptist Church in Kull, South Carolina. And I assume it still looks the same. The couple had 4 children, Frank J., Agnes S., Sonia, and Loretta, who was someone I worked with to get this information. You have a question? Okay. They raised their 4 children on their family farm and quickly became involved in the Kull and Lake City communities. Agnes established herself as a well-known visual artist that produced paintings and ceramics for the community, along with, apparently she dabbled in a lot, but that was the 2 that most people knew her as, paintings and ceramics. So she joined numerous art competitions in which she judged and she participated in, and she won several of those as well. She later joined the teaching staff at Lake City Junior High, which is also known as Ronald E. McNair Middle School, where she taught as an art teacher. Aside from teaching, she was also involved in local garden clubs, a 4-H volunteer, and a Veterans of Foreign Wars member. I think that's it for Agnes. So, any questions before I move on to Abe?
What did the 4 children, what occupations were?
I know Frank was a doctor. He passed away last year. Sonia was an oncology doctor, and she was pretty high up in her field. She died very young, but she was like the director of the oncology office in Houston, Texas, I think. I don't know what the other sister ended up doing, and then Loretta is a professor out in Nevada. So pretty accomplished, all of them. Okay. So Abraham, also formerly known as Abe, from Lebanon to Lake City. He was born in Mullen, South Carolina on May 6, 1923. He was the first generation of Thomys to be born in America. His parents, Najib and Karimi Jacob Thomy, moved to Lake City in 1923 with their 5 children, Alice, George, Evelyn, Joseph, and Abe. So again, giving a little background on their family history before going into them themselves. So it starts in Harik. Am I saying that correctly? Okay. It was a suburb of Beirut, Lebanon, which I think I'm saying it right. So Abe's grandfather, stick with me, they all have similar names. Abe's grandfather, Abraham George Thomy, he's an important figure in this story. So Lebanon is bordered by Syria to the north and east and Israel to the south. The geographical location of Lebanon resulted in the country having a unique position in history, in which it was known as a center for cultural and religious diversity. Some Lebanese Christians trace their roots back to Muslim ancestry, while others find themselves the direct descendants of early Christians. So the ruling authority in Lebanon during the early 20th century was the Turks. The Turks, according to accounts by the Thomy family, ruled with full authority and were especially harsh to those who practiced Christianity. Let's see, how did they end up in America? I know this is a lot to read. So Abraham George Thomy was a landowner, farmer, businessman, Arabian horse breeder, and a Christian. Abraham and his wife, Jamalee Raji Thomy, had the following children: Najib, Abe's father, Salim Hasibi, please tell me, am I saying it right? Okay. Tanis, Marshall, Halim, Efi, and Abib. I hope I'm doing justice. During the early 1900s, Turkish marauders were free to roam the country and do as they pleased. Salim, Abe's uncle, happened to have the misfortune of encountering one such group of marauders. The story goes as follows. This is from accounts from scrapbooks of Mr. George Thomy. On a seemingly random day, Salim was out riding his Arabian horse when he was confronted by a band of Turks, led by a man by the name of Tabara. Tabara demanded that Salim dismount from his horse as the gang leader planned to shoot and kill him, and he did not want to frighten the steed in the process. However, in the act of dismounting, Salim was quick enough to pull his gun and kill Tabara in front of his gang of men. At the demise of their leader, the band quickly fled. This event led to Abraham sending all of his children, except for Adib and Tanis due to their age, to America, as the Turks would have collected a blood debt on the Thomy family. So these pictures, the top left corner is, I think that's Najib, Marshall in the middle, and then Salim on the end. Salim is in the middle. His mother, Jamalee, is sitting down. I don't know who that is standing up. The other man is standing up there. And I'm not sure who the lady is either. Okay. It's okay. And then Salim and I think that's Marshall again on the bottom. So arriving to New York, so as some of you may know, the Thomy family had a general store downtown. Yeah, a dry goods store downtown Lake City. But they also at one point in time had one in New York. So this is I guess just a piece of notary with their their address and stuff on it from up New York. So Najib and Salim arrived in America in 1905. Najib and his brother-in-law, Simon Adini, set up a dry goods store called Thomy Adini. Unfortunately, they were forced to liquidate because they were too generous and somebody took advantage of that and just skipped town. They couldn't pay for it. So some time goes in between there. They moved to a couple different states, but eventually they landed in Lake City. Again, born in Mullins in 1923, but relocating to Lake City shortly after. Abe and his family were new to the South. They quickly became involved in the community with the help of Najib's brother Marshall, who had already established a business in Lake City years prior. I'm guessing that is the dry goods store. Abe created lifelong memories here with his family and friends at his childhood home, and would later write a play called City, which is Katie up here, that is his grandmother, that is Agnes for grandmother. This story tells of his childhood. It really paints who Abe was as a person and how he viewed other people as well. If you ever get a chance to read that, I think there's a copy, there will be a copy at Lynch's Link, so you can always borrow that. Okay. So his early years, this picture right here is taken from the 1941 Lake City High School yearbook. It's Abe taking pictures with, I don't know what kind of camera, but some kind of camera. And then Joseph, Abe, and Mr. George Thomy. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the same thing I
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. Cool. So he was introduced, Abe was introduced to photography at 8 years old when a preacher next door gave him some developing material. In 1939, at 16, he was tasked with taking most of the photos for his high school yearbook. And that same year, he received his first paid commission of $25 to create a portrait of a local physician's family. I wish I knew which physician it was. We don't. It would be cool if we could connect him to J.D. Whitehead, but I just don't think so.
Is Abe and Mr. George brothers?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So he lost both of his parents very early on before he even graduated high school in 41. His father passed away in 1936 and his mother a couple years later in 1940. So after high school, he was working with Samuel Chase Photography Studio in Florence. I don't know if anybody knows that one. I've never heard of it before. Yes, you do. Okay, he was paid $15 a week. The following year, 1941, the United States enters World War II. Joe was the first one to enlist in August of 1941, and then George in August of 1942, and then Abe finally enlisted in 43. So I had to add him in here because he was important to the family, and his death really affected them heavily. So Joe was a technical sergeant. He served with the U.S. Air Force as a navigator and ferrying command. He was tasked with carrying supplies all over to different theaters and performed over 100 missions during the duration of his service. In 1944, he was set out on a mission from Long Beach, California, with Europe as his destination. On January 16, 1944, the plane and crew departed from Atkinson Field near Georgetown in British Guiana. I think I'm saying that wrong, but it's okay. The crew was expected to make a stop in Belém, Brazil, where they would refuel, but they didn't make any contact after they left Atkinson Field. Joseph's plane was determined to have experienced an explosion on board, which caused it to fall from the sky, and obviously there was no survivors from that. This deeply affected the family. You can see that through letters from Abe to George, talking about how Abe had not only lost a brother, but he had lost a father figure in the process of it. So George was also enlisted in the war. He was in the U.S. Army. He didn't serve very long due to an injury. But once he returned home, he attended the University of South Carolina School of Law, and in 1952 was admitted to the South Carolina Bar. He practiced in Lake City and later served as the first municipal judge from 76 to 92. And I'm sure his name is not unknown to anybody. So what did Abe do? So all these pictures are from his World War II album. This top left photo is from his unit. You can see him. He is the star on the left, one up. That is him. So he took, I don't know if he took these personally, but these are the type of photos he would have been taking. These aerial shots, he would have developed them. And I don't know if he analyzed them or if he just gave them over to somebody to analyze.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you please say that again?
Okay, I don't know what that was about. I guess a ghost decided to say something. But this is him developing over here on the right-hand side, developing materials or photographs. And it's the same with these other pictures. So he served in the Pacific Theater with the U.S. Army, or Air Force. He was in the 5th Air Force 6th Photographic Reconnaissance Group and the 25th Photographic Reconnaissance Squadron. His job was to take such developed aerial photos of different locations, aircrafts, and ships. His time as a photo reconnaissance technician allowed him to document crucial points of the war effort against the Japanese. One of his most notable contributions to the war, at least what I view as notable, was his team's involvement with the film from the B-29 number 91, Necessary Evil's camera. The Necessary Evil was one of the 2 support planes that accompanied the Enola Gay as it made its way to Hiroshima to drop the first atomic bomb. I had no idea that the Enola Gay had 2 but support planes. I'd never heard of them before. So this was a whole new world for me when I was doing this research. So I think this is the bomber. I couldn't find anything because it was one of those things where she was the ugly sister, never got attention. So once she was done, she kind of faded off. But I think this is her, and this is a photo of the bombing of Hiroshima. So below is an excerpt from Abe's memory of the bombing and the time leading up to the bombing. July and August of 1945 were very busy months for our photo lab. We were developing the aerial photographs of 4 Japanese cities, Hiroshima, Kokura, Nagata, and Nagasaki. We knew big things were happening on the island of Tainan. 4 B-29s were there. Great secrets surrounded the island. August 4th and 5th of 1945, many from the lab were sent to Tian to set cameras and filters on a B-29 number 91, which we could conclude was flying recon trips to Japan. The filters were so dark we could not see through them. The most we could infer was that this was a flight that was going to make history. On August 6th in the afternoon, word came that an atomic bomb had been dropped. We came to our lab and learned that we were to develop the films. 3 days later, we viewed the aerial photographs, I'm not correct, of Hiroshima, not believing what we saw. So he had conflicting opinions. He never thought that, he was like, what we did, was it really, truly good, or was it not? But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting that he was involved in that. And no one probably knew at all, because he probably didn't talk about it. But yeah. After that, after his time in the Pacific was up, he returned back home where he attended the Antonelli School of Photography in Philadelphia. He later returned to Lake City, where he and his first wife, Ruth Thomy, settled and had 3 children, David, Abraham, Richard Jacob, and Karen Thomy. Abe and Ruth later separated, and he remarried Marjorie Twilley. He did a lot of local weddings and did the portraits and color correction and tinting. He also offered amenities such as black and white photography and heavy oil on canvas. His services became widely known and respected by those in the surrounding areas. And received patronage from multiple generations of families. So he opened a photography studio in Lake City and offered classes teaching beginners photography. He also started a photography club and continued to do so. To do all this when his family moved to Sumter in the 60s. In Sumter, he and his son David opened a phone service called Abe's Answering Service, which apparently was a pretty big deal. It went widespread. Most of South Carolina's East Coast and inland areas were involved in his company somehow, some way. So he also, besides like locals and well-known people in this area, he photographed celebrities, politicians, and writers, some of which included Mickey Spillane, which was a good friend of his, Ernest Hollins, Joanne Blondell, and Bernard Barrage. I don't think I'm saying that right. Thank you. Abe was also had several exhibitions throughout the years. And he was a founding member of the South Carolina Photography Association and received a commendation from the General Assembly of the State of South Carolina for 50 years of portraiture. Okay. He also wrote a book called The Tin Guide. It's actually really good. If you ever get a chance to read it, I think you can get it off of Abe's books or thrift books, something like that, for pretty cheap. It's a pretty good read. It tells, I think it's a loose telling of his time in the war period, so if you want like a fiction that's loosely nonfiction, that'd be a cool read. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for having me, and I hope that you learned something. But yeah, next meeting I guess is September 26th. As far as I know, I could be wrong. But okay. All right. Thank you.